come for Mark in that way, although it can come for call center workers, because those jobs are tradable as well. But we can't wait. I was in Indianapolis with the Carrier workers. They make furnaces. They're owned by United Technologies. United Technologies gets $8 billion a year from our government, not for furnaces per se, but for all kinds of things that they produce. Major defense contractor. And yet their subsidiary, Carrier, under pressure to increase profits. This came from the headquarters of United Technologies. Announced last winter that they're going to move this coming year, 2017, that entire plant, 2,000 people, 2,000 jobs, to Monterey, where it's $3 an hour instead of $25 an hour. If we don't unite with those workers, if we don't understand that these fights, whether it's the environment, or the rights of immigrants, or what happens to them, or workers' rights, even if it's not us, and we keep waiting and waiting and waiting, there's not going to be enough of us to fight these fights. And that's what's really at stake here. So there's really two issues. One is the process. We've got to understand that it is now. Too many organizations, Mark, even ours, CWA, oh, it's all about the election. We wait till after the election, we're not going to have time to mobilize people. Because then it's a matter of days or weeks. That is how this works. And that's deliberate. And again, our president, who I still love as a human being and what he's done, our president met last Friday with Governor Kasich from Ohio. This was the leadership for him of who's going to help him get this passed. Governor Kasich from Ohio, so-called now moderate Republican, not moderate from my point of view. Hank Paulson, Bush's Treasury Secretary, who before that was the CEO of Goldman Sachs. Michael Bloomberg, the multi-billionaire who made billions while he was mayor of New York City. That's who he met with to figure out how we're going to get the extra votes we need in his office, in the Oval Office. That's what we're up against here. This is the #1 issue for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Not even close. For the Business Roundtable, the 100 biggest companies in our country. And as again, many of you know, we heard this when Sherry was asking, that's because of one provision that's been in all these agreements, investor-state dispute settlement. This agreement is 5,500 plus pages, not because it's about trade. We have to be clear on this when we push and mobilize. We can be for trade, even free trade. Tear down the tariffs so everybody can. That's not what this is about. This is about investment rights. And even that, we could be sympathetic. If a company invests and the government passes something that destroys their investment, yeah, there should be somewhere they can go to get back what they put in. This is not about getting back what you put in. This is about getting back all the future lost profits. So many of us here may have been against the Keystone Pipeline. Soon after this president said no to the Keystone Pipeline, the major investor, TransCanada, sued the United States under investor-state dispute settlement. And again, almost word for word, that's the same provision that's in the Trans-Pacific Partnership 30 years later. And said, we're going to lose $15 billion in future profits because the president turned this down. To them, that's a violation of the North American Free Trade Agreement. They're suing now, not in our courts, but in a secret tribunal with 3 corporate lawyers. They're the judges. One is appointed by the United States. It's the Attorney General's office in our case. One by TransCanada, and the third one is picked from a list the same way as any other arbitration works. But they're all the same type. To do these cases, you've got to be like $1,000 an hour or more corporate lawyer because it's all gibberish to the rest of us. Even to most people who graduate law school. These cases it's arcane law, the way they do it. And it's above, this is the reason why with Republicans in particular, this is a gigantic sovereignty issue. So #1 on sovereignty is once passed, our government can't change it. That's not democracy. The 12 have to agree together to change a single sentence. That's a sovereignty issue. #2, our courts. We can be sued outside our own court system in an international tribunal with 3 corporate lawyers as the judges. Sovereignty. Key issue. Republicans talk about sovereignty until it comes to something like this, because their funders, and in your case, Representative Young ranks #6 in terms of how much corporate money he's gotten in contributions. Out of 435, he's #6. So we get lip service about sovereignty, and then when it comes to this, sovereignty evidently doesn't matter. And then they say it's about trade, and we're against trade. At least for me, I'm not against trade, but we want fair trade. Fair trade means you don't put investor rights above our rights.
Right.
So they get to go to secret tribunals. What happens to us? As the president said to me, Larry, you got to admit, our chapter on the environment is the best in any trade agreement. Larry, you got to admit, the chapter on workers' rights, on labor they call it, is the best in any of these trade agreements. I said, you know what, Mr. President? If we were in a law school debate, you would win a point on that. But the problem is, this isn't a debate. The problem is, and he said to me, well, I'm a pretty good debater. The problem is enforcement. We don't have investor-state, we don't have citizen versus state dispute settlement. We get reports. They get reparations. Occidental Petroleum won a case last year about drilling rights in Ecuador that they lost. Ecuador denied them drilling rights. They got a $3 billion settlement from this international tribunal. $3 billion. They don't have $3 billion. They haven't paid it. They're likely to settle and say, okay, Occidental Petroleum, what do you want? Because they don't have the $3 billion. What do we get? So Honduras grossly violated. They had a coup in Honduras. They grossly violated the rights of workers. I was part of going to Honduras, documenting a case, bringing that case. 5 years. And we got a nice report on it. We did get a nice report. If you read the report, you would say, that's a good report and document from our Labor Department. And that has been turned over to the trade rep, the same trade rep who's doing all these deals, Michael Froman. And then it took years, by the way, 2 years. He then had discussions with his counterpart in Honduras. You know what we got at the end? This was a victory. At the end of that, we got promises on paper that would change. Meanwhile, there's hundreds of people, there are people like me, or union organizers, dead in Honduras. We get a report, they get reparations. There's no reparations for those families of those murdered people. There's no reparations about the environmental destruction. The environmental agreement is the same thing. There's a very nice chapter in the TPP on the environment. But the enforcement is up here for the corporations, reparations in the billions. And it's down here for us. We get a nice report. And then we might get new written promises that they're going to change. Again, I'm going on too long. I want to shift to questions. But the reasons, it doesn't matter where you come from. Food safety. Nation of origin gets obliterated. Any of the 12 countries count the same as if it's made here, or produced here, or grown here. So food safety, you can't tell where the food is going to come from. There's one reason after another. But the real issue now is mobilization. You know, how do we mobilize now? We're going to hear more from Evan on that. Do we want to take questions now, or yes? Okay. Is there a mic for people, or you want to come up here?
Yeah, Alejandro has it.
Oh, there's the mic. Thanks, Alejandro. Thanks for everything.
President Obama's a pretty bright guy.
Yep.
The question is, why is he supporting TPP? Why do others who support it, what do they say the value of it is?
Yeah, so it's two things. Number one, this is not going to come as a shock. The power of the multinational companies in both parties is out of control. Right. So while more Democrats will talk about that, we want to repeal Citizens United, guess what happens in the meantime? They're taking the money. Now, I'm not saying that's his problem directly, but it's a problem about that part of what's become our politics, regardless of who the president is. So the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Business Roundtable, who represent that, the U.S. Chamber lives literally across the park from the White House. They have unbelievable power. Secretary Kerry, when he became the Secretary of State, right? This is probably 2 years ago now. He gave a speech at the fanciest D.C. hotel called the Four Seasons. And in that speech, he addressed the CEOs of American-based multinationals that are in Asia. And he told them in that speech, literally, you can get this speech online, it's a public transcript of this speech. He literally said to them, here's my top advisor, Evan. Here's you. These are my top advisors. Evan used to work for you over there. I don't remember the names of the companies. And he used to work over there. And Sherry, she didn't work for you, but I'm going to embed her in your company so she gets to feel what it's like for you every day. And I've talked to a number of our ambassadors in countries like Honduras. They have one person for human rights, and they have 15 from the Commerce Department. And our foreign policy, this is reason 2, is way too much based on getting U.S.-based multinationals to invest in these countries.
That's right.
That's what So you think about that. Honduras, with all these human rights violations, what our foreign policy is to say to the government of Honduras, that in my view is illegitimate to begin with. We don't have to get into the coup and the rest of it. We could. But that's what we bring. That's what we're bringing to Vietnam, is the U.S.-based multinationals will invest because they get terms that say that if the government or another government, because they don't have the greatest government there from my point of view, changes anything in Vietnam in the future that jeopardizes the profits of our multinationals, they're in violation and they can be sued. They'll have to pay up or change the policy. So this sounds like, conspiracy talk. It's not. It's in the open. And so it's a combination of our foreign policy, which has become totally dependent on promising U.S. multinational investment, and it's a combination of making those same companies feel, regardless, and I'm on the DNC, Democratic National Committee, so obviously I believe there's a difference between these two parties. But when it comes to too many things, there's not much of a difference at all. And when we talk about so-called trade deals, or even foreign policy, those differences get obliterated. Right. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's my understanding of this. And again, I've actually got the opportunity to argue this with the president, almost one-on-one with a couple of other people there. They didn't talk, and I didn't get to talk much either. But that's what you hear. And so the popular version of that is, he says, it's China or us. Who's going to write the rules? Well, the problem is, check out the 5,500 pages. Those rules aren't written for family farmers or factory workers or any of us. Those rules are for U.S. corporations to guarantee their profits. It's not much comfort to me that it's those rules versus the rules that exist right now. But that's what they end up talking about. So they wrap it now in the last hour here, last month. They got only a month to convince enough votes. They're going to wrap it in the national security argument to try to go and jam people and say, Representative, you're not patriotic. You're not supporting us. And you know what I say? Our sons and daughters are the ones who put their lives on the line in these wars. Don't tell us that the foreign policy and national security depends on us giving up our jobs and our environmental rights as well. We're fed up. We're sick and tired.
Okay, my question goes to Obama's motivation for passing this. So, I realize he got into power with the backing of major corporate money, but at this point, he's got 2 months left. So, do you think that he personally actually wants this to happen?
Yes.
Do you think okay, so you don't think that there's consequences if he doesn't? I mean, so he must personally want this.
Yeah, he personally wants it to show that he can get this done. It comes from, I'm not a psychologist, we do have one here, but I have a daughter who's pretty good at this, who's a clinical psychologist, but it comes partly from wanting to get something done. And, nobody's more frustrated than those of us in this room at how Congress has operated, how we lost the Congress in 2010. The Congress, from my point of view, passed probably 400 decent pieces of legislation in 9 and 10 that never got to the floor of the Senate. So that was frustrating for him too. But now I can get this done. And he is convinced that at least on the national security argument, that it's worth getting done. We could delve deeper into who's around him in the White House now. Michael Froman, and I've said this to his face, so I don't mind saying this publicly. He was at Citibank, he was in management. Citibank gave, and you can check this out in 2 seconds on a smartphone, Citibank gave him $3.5 million bonus to take the job as U.S. Trade Representative. Now, that should be out of bounds. You shouldn't be able to get money like that from corporate America. This is the top of Wall Street. To go and take a job as U.S. Trade Rep, what are we, stupid? We don't think that makes any difference when somebody takes the job, where they came from? And we got the same problem on the other way out. There's 450 people roughly that work for the president, and if you went and look right now about where do they go when they leave, too many of them have done well by supposedly doing good and landed at one corporate job after another. We have to clean up this democracy. That's going to take us a lot more than 1 month. In this 1 month, we have to stop the TPP.
Can you talk a little bit about how it's going to serve individuals' rights in concern to large corporations and the way that they affect our health, our well-being, they strip away our legal rights to intervene on our own behalf?
Yeah, it sounds like you could talk a little more about that. Why don't you talk a little more first, and then I'll echo you. How's that?
Okay, so say an individual is in some way harmed. Oh, sorry. Did you hear me the first time?
I did, yeah.
Okay. So say an individual is harmed in some way
Yeah.
by a major corporation who is benefiting from the TPP.
Right.
Can you talk about how it strips away an individual's right to legally go after that particular corporation?
Yeah, so this again is a little bit beyond what I know. I know a lot of things, and I don't know a lot of other things. You've sort of gone into the area that I'm no expert on.